I want to explain to you why reducing the cost of fertilizers, as the government did the other day, will not reduce the cost of maize flour or the cost of unga. Let me give you the facts. We produce 40 million bags and we consume 54 million. So we have a deficit of around 14, give or take a little. Now, why do we have a deficit? Why do we consume more than we produce? When you look at the statistics, it is not because of fertilizer. It is not because fertilizers are expensive. The biggest factor is lack of rains. When there's more rains, there is more maize. Actually, that is the biggest factor. It's usually not fertilizers, though fertilizers can play some role. Now, what governs the cost of maize flour in Kenya? To answer this question, you need to map out the economic scale of these factors. What governs these things? What governs? Why is it that sometimes we buy flour at 100 shillings some years back, and now we are buying at almost 300 shillings? Okay, let me give you the facts. 60% of the factors, 60% of the reasons why we buy unga at this price and not at this price, 60% is governed by the law of demand and supply. Okay? Now, 15% is governed by the cost of production. By the cost of production, we are talking about labor, electricity, fuel, because of manufacturing factor, okay? And also labor, of course, in the fields. Now, 15% is governed by inputs. That is fertilizer and any other thing that you can call input for the people who are doing the farming. Now, remember, in Kenya, we have not mechanized maize production. We still depend on smallholders for maize production. So if you are going to reduce the price of unga, you need to look at what is the biggest factor. We have seen the law of supply and demand, which is governed by rainfall. So we have rainfall is the biggest factor. We have more rains, we have more maize. Second is the cost of production. And third, inputs. The last 10% is what we call others. There could be other factors. Political, importation of cheap maize. So 10% is governed by what we call others. So if you are going to reduce the cost of unga in Kenya, you have to look at the biggest factor, which is the law of supply and demand, which is rainfall. If you have, which is governed by the amount of rainfall, because we do not do irrigation. So if you want to reduce the cost of unga by the largest margin, you must think about the law of supply and demand. You must bring in more maize. We must move from smallholder and start doing irrigation. That is the biggest way. That is the biggest thing that we can do. That is the best thing also that we can do to bring the cost of maize down. Bringing the cost of fertilizer down, like the government did, can only bring the cost of maize flour by between 0 and 15%. All right? But since you have increased the cost of fuel and the cost of labor and the cost of electricity, because the government, of course, increased the cost of fuel at the same time, by lowering down the cost of fertilizer, you have offset the gains of cheap fertilizer by increasing the cost of fuel. So price of unga in Kenya is going to increase. It is not going to reduce. Whether you lower down the fertilizers or you don't, the cost of unga is going to increase. That is the economics. Those are the facts. Take it.